Welcome dear learners to a new video on E-quill. In this video, we'll talk about the poetical type, elegy. Let's start the video without further ado. The original scope. Initially, the term elegy used to refer to poems written on various subjects ranging from grave or serious to gay or happy ones. In Greece, elegy was any song or poem written in the elegiac measure. Let's see what a poem written in the elegiac measure would look like. It would be a couplet with the first line in the dactylic hexameter and the second line in dactylic pentameter. Let's look at what a dactyl is. Similar to I am that we saw in sonnet in our last video, dactyl is a metrical feat in poetry which contributes to the rhythm of poems. Consider the word camera. It has three syllables which are camera, of which the first syllable is stressed while the other two syllables are unstressed. Let's tell the word again, camera. So there you can see how the stress is on the first syllable, ca. So this is what a dactyl is, where the first syllable would be stressed and the next two syllables would be unstressed and unstressed. So for a poem written in the elegiac measure, in the first line there would be 6 dactyls, whereas in the second line there would be 10 dactyls. You can see the image here to have a better understanding of that. The term elegy began to be used in the current sense since the 17th century. According to a Glossary of Literary Terms, an elegy is a formal and sustained lament in verse for the death of a particular person, usually ending in a consolation. We'll talk about the modern connotation of the term elegy. In the previous slides, we have seen that in the original sense, in Greece, a piece of work was considered an elegy based on the form, whether it was written in the elegiac measure or not. But in the modern sense, the subject was given more importance in deciding whether a work is an elegy or not based on the form, but on the subject. In the last slide, we have seen M.H Abrams' definition of elegy. As the definition suggests, it began to refer to a poem of formal lament on the death of someone. So there, the focus is on subject, whether somebody is lamenting or crying or mourning about something or someone. The medieval poem, The Pearl, is an example of an elegy. Then Chaucer's The Book of Duchess, published in 1532, is on the death of the wife of John of Gaunt. So we have seen how elegy is a poem of formal lament. So here Chaucer is lamenting the death of the wife of John of Gaunt, or lamenting the death of Blanche. So that is the Book of Duchess. Here you can see the book. And I'm coming to another example, Alfred Lord Tennyson's In Memoriam, published in 1850. It mourns the death of his friend Arthur Henry Hallam. And the next example would be W.H. Auden's In Memory of W.B. Yeats. It was published in 1948, in which Auden mourns the death of the Irish poet W.B. Yeats. In the last few slides, we looked at the original scope, definition, and modern connotation of the term elegy. Now let's look at the other features of elegy, like the style or theme. Digression is also another stylistic feature of elegy. First, the theme. The theme is usually mournful, where the poet sadly reflects on the event of the death or his feelings. In the previous slide, we have seen the examples of different elegies. For example, take the book or take the elegy in memoriam. There, the death of Arthur Hallam is mourned by the poet Alfred Tennyson. An elegy could also be about unrequited love, fall of a city or civilization, meditation on mortality, as in Gray's Elegy written in a country churchyard, written in 1757. These are the first few lines of Gray's Elegy. Now talking about the style. They are usually elaborate in style. As we can see, if we go through the above examples, you can have a look at any of the examples that we have mentioned earlier. And I'll also add the links to one or two of the poems in the description box so that you can go and see how elaborate these elegies are. Elegies are not a spontaneous expression of sorrow, but a conscious work of art. The poets brood over the event that had triggered their feelings. That could be the death or the fall of a city, that could be unrequited love, and write elaborately on that. So it is not a spontaneous overflow of the sorrow or feelings, but rather a conscious work of art. As mentioned earlier, sometimes the soul of a death would be dead. Sometimes the sole theme of an elegy would be death. Sometimes there could be digressions or moving away from the theme or the subject, where the poets start talking about death and go on talking about philosophical or reflective topics. For example, in Memoriam, Tennyson digresses to talk about the puzzles of life and about destiny. Now we'll start talking about the pastoral elegy, which is a significant type of elegy. The pastoral elegy is a type of elegy which presents both the poet and the subject about whom the elegy is written as shepherds. Shepherds here you can see. In Latin, pastor means a shepherd. And that's how this kind of elegy or this type of elegy got its name, pastoral elegy. Through the pastoral metaphor, the poet and the subject would be fellow shepherds. Metaphor, we know that it is used to compare one thing to the other. So here the poet and the subject are compared to shepherds who would be feeding the cattle, the sheep, etc. So here in pastoral elegy, the pastoral metaphor is used. The form of pastoral elegy is believed to be originated by the Greek poet Theocritus and was later perfected by Virgil. The form of pastoral elegy got introduced to the English literature through Spenser's The Shepherd's Calendar. Now, to talk about the setting of a pastoral elegy, we know that the subject or the characters in the pastoral elegy would be shepherds, and thus we can guess or the setting is obvious that it would be rustic or rural. See the shepherd's calendar as an example of a pastoral elegy, and now let's see the other examples. Spenser's Astrophel, written in 1595, on the death of Philip Sidney, is an example of pastoral elegy. Sidney died in 1586, and the elegy was published in 1595. This could illustrate how this poetical form is not spontaneous. If it had been spontaneous, Spenser would have written this elegy in 1586 itself. But since it's a conscious work of art, he took some time. He brooded over the event of death, the effects of the death on his feelings, and wrote the elegy. But that is not always the case, because sometimes some of the pastoral elegies are published in the same year of the death of the subject. Moving to the other examples, John Milton's Lycidas is another example of a pastoral elegy. It was published in 1638 and mourns the death of his friend Edward King, who drowned to death. The poem also talks about the degradation of poetry and religion. Another example is Arnold's Thyrsis, Matthew Arnold's Thyrsis, written in 1865, where he mourns the death of his friend A.H. Clough. Next would be Shelley's Adonais, published in 1821, and it is an elegy on the death of John Keats. Here, Adonais. And the last example would be of Walt Whitman, his pastoral elegy, When Lilacs Last in the Door Yet Bloomed, written in 1865, and it mourns the death of Abraham Lincoln. This is a lilac. In what a pastoral elegy is, and we have also come across different examples of the form of the pastoral elegy. Now, the prominent practitioners of the pastoral elegy form developed a set of elegiac conventions, or the rules or patterns which we could see commonly in the pastoral elegy form. Let's see each of these conventions one by one. While we talk about these conventions, we'll consider Milton's Lycidas as an example so that the ideas could be better understood. Starting with the first convention. The mourner and the subject are fictionally represented as shepherds. In our introduction to pastoral elegy, we have seen how both the poet, or how a pastoral elegy uses a pastoral metaphor, where the poet and the subject would be fictionally represented as shepherds. We look at these lines from Lycidas, we can see how the poet talks about he and his friend as shepherds fed the flocks upon the lawns and the hills. Let's read the lines. For we were nursed upon the selfsame hill, fed the same flock by fountain, shade, and rill. So here we can see how the poet talks about himself as a shepherd and also about his friend as a shepherd. So this is the first convention that we were talking about, that the mourner and the subject are fictionally represented as shepherds. Based on the next convention, the pastoral elegies would have the invocation of the muses at the beginning. Similar to an epic, which we'll see in a later video, the poet calls the muses at the beginning. Look at these lines from Lycidas. Begin then, sisters of the sacred well, that from beneath the seat of Jove doth spring. Here the sisters of the sacred well refers to the 9 muses, appealing to them for inspiration. With lucky words favor my destined urn. So he is asking them to inspire him with words, with inspiration, with imagination. Lycidas, like the other pastoral elegies, refer to classical myths and characters as well. Muses are characters from classical myths. Similarly, Lycidas also makes references to other myths. Such references in literature are called allusion. This term is important and it would be good if you take note of this term, allusion. We get to read about Triton, Alpheus, the Muses, etc. as we go through Lycidas. So allusion means a reference to classical myths or mythology, etc. So these are all examples of allusion as they are mythological characters. According to the next convention, the nature joins the poet's mourning. Here, the woods, the caves, the thyme are all mourning the death of the shepherd. Now thou art gone, and never must return. Thee, shepherd, thee the woods and desert caves, with wild thyme and the gadding vine overgrown, and all their echoes mourn. So this is the third convention where we can see that the nature is mourning along with the poet. Mourning means becoming sad, lamenting. The next convention, the mourner charges the nymphs or the guardians with negligence. Poet asks the nymphs what were they doing or where were they when his friend was drowning in the deep waters. We have discussed that Edward King drowned to death when his ship sank. So here he is asking or he is questioning the nymphs or the guardians with he is asking what were they doing? Where were you nymphs when the remorseless deep closed over the head of your loved Lycidas? Where were you when he was dying, when he was going into the deep waters? The pastoral elegies talk about a procession of appropriate mourners. So this is how a procession looks like. And in the lines 88 to 111, Lycidas or Milton talks about how the different mythological characters like Apollo, Triton and his winds, the sea nymphs, and Saint Peter joins the mourning of his friend or the other shepherd. To the next convention, a pastoral elegy usually questions the justice of fate or of providence. He talks about how death or Edward King's fate has robbed his fame. Lycidas also attacks the negligence of the church, calling them blind mouths, who are themselves incapable of holding a sheep hook. So he is saying that the people who are looking after them are themselves incapable of holding a sheep hook. This is a sheep hook, and telling that he and his friend is more capable than the church or the people who are governing them. So as I have mentioned earlier when we were talking about the features of elegy, we come across the stylistic feature of digression, where we start talking about something and we'll move move on talking about something else. So this is an example of that. He starts talking about the death of his friend Edward King and or death of a fellow shepherd, and then digresses to talk about the negligence of church. He questions the corruption of church, etc. Those Renaissance elegies, there had been elaborate passages that describe the flowers brought to the hearse. Hearse is a funeral vehicle, so flowers would be brought to the vehicle. Milton appeals to the Sicilian muse to call the valleys, asking them to bring flowers of different hues or colors. The poet mentions different flowers like the tufted croto, jessamine, white pink, pansy, the woodbine, amaranthus, etc. in the poem. Many other flowers are also referred to in the poem. You can see as you read the poem, that is the tufted croto, pale jessamine, could be jasmine here, the white pink, the pansy, this is a pansy, growing violet, the musk rose, woodbine, amaranthus, this is amaranthus, and the daffodils. So all these flowers, elaborate description of the funeral flowers is another convention that we can see in the pastoral elegies. To the last Elegiac Convention, according to which the pastoral elegies end with a closing consolation. We have seen that in M.H Abrams' definition as well, that it is in this closing consolation that the poet realizes that the subject or the dead shepherd has entered a higher life. Consolation could also be because of a scope of future reunion. So he is expecting that after his death, he can meet his friend. If we go through the lines of Lycidas, in the blessed kingdoms meek of joy and love, there entertain him all the saints above in solemn troops and sweet societies. So he is saying that how the blessed kingdoms are abundant with joy and love, and how his friend would be happy in the blessed kingdoms. So this is how, or this could be how a closing consolation looks like. And so the poet is asking the shepherds, the other fellow shepherds, to weep no more. Henceforth thou art the genius of the show. In thy large recompense shalt be good to all that wander in the perilous flood. So these are the common conventions which could be observed in pastoral elegies. Video, we have come across the definition of an elegy, its features, pastoral elegy, and the Elegiac Conventions with reference to Milton's Lycidas. You could find the line numbers on the left-hand side of the pictures, and I have attached the link to access the whole poem in the description box. Those who are interested can check out the link. I hope the video helped you in understanding the basics of the poetical type, elegy, and I look forward for your valuable feedback and suggestions. Thank you for your support. See you soon in another video. Happy learning.